Hello, we are joined by Shannon. She is a protection worker uh, from the United States. I'm going to hand it over to Shannon to tell us a little bit about who she is and where she's located.
My name is Shannon Warner, and I live in Oklahoma. Um, I worked for child welfare for 19 years, and then I worked in foster care for 3 years, which is in where I lived. I worked for a private foster care agency because we privatized foster care. Some of the foster care, not all, some of the foster care about maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So after I left child protection, I moved over and did the privatized foster care. Um, when I worked in child protection, I did both treatment or permanency, depending on where you're from. And then I did investigations and was an actual child protective worker for about 6 years. And then I was a supervisor for the last 8 or 9 years that I worked there. And then, and now actually I work with the addicts now. I'm an addiction worker, but I work for a private agency that does, withdrawal management, that type of stuff through the hospital.
Okay, so you've done quite a bit. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, you've it sounds like you've pretty much done it all in child protection. Um, so total of 19 years in child protection. Um, and can you tell us a little bit? You said you're in Oklahoma.
hmm
Uh, so we've heard from practitioners from different jurisdictions. Can you tell us a bit about how child protection is done in Oklahoma? Like maybe from receipt of referral. If you give us a sense of how it's managed once a referral is made to the organization.
Our referrals come into a centralized hotline. It didn't always used to be that way. Initially, when I first started, we took the referrals in the office. But now they switched over to a more centralized. I think that had something to do with I think there was a federal mandate to make uh, child protection more centralized or more standardized throughout the entire country. So they come in through a hotline, and they kind of trickle down from the hotline to the state, to the county, or I'm sorry, it's a state hotline. So they trickle down from the hotline to the county. And then but they're assigned through our hotline. They're not assigned through our county anymore. So if the hotline accepts it, it comes to the county. And then it's prioritized by the hotline as well. We do mostly investigations. We do very, very few assessments, very, very few assessments. Um, they just switched in the time that I worked for um, child protection. Things changed drastically from the time I started until the time I left. Um, Once they're assigned to the county, then they're assigned to a worker. Most of our units have about 5 workers apiece on a good day. Child protection workers don't. I think the average length is 3 to 5 years that they stay, that we have turnover, because it's difficult. It's a hard position to be in. Um, Once they're assigned, depending on the priority, which is we have just one and twos. Ones they got to go out immediately, and twos they have to go out within 3 to 5 days, depending on what the hotline assigns. Um, then we go out and we do our investigation.
Okay, so a lot there to pick apart because it's fascinating. I've jotted down a few of what a few elements of what you've said. So, um, especially the one and two, I'd like to touch on that. But also, if we start with, and then I want to talk about turnover because that's fascinating. You said it's a difficult job, so hearing a little bit about what makes it difficult in Oklahoma. Um, what was the is or was the average of caseloads for your staff?
When I started, I think I walked into because I did treatment for a year. So when I
Okay.
actually switched over to child protection, I didn't. They didn't do any additional training or anything. They just said, "Here's your caseload." Um,
Okay.
yeah, the average caseload was about 20 to 30 cases. And they're assigned kind of as they come in. So your caseload is kind of a rotating caseload because you get an assignment, you close an assignment, you get an assignment, you close an assignment. Um, that's hopefully how it works. A lot of times it isn't, because there is a lot of work that goes into each case, depending on the severity, what you're investigating. So the average caseload then was, could be close to 30. When I left, the average caseload was supposed to be 12.
Okay. So the 30 is that um every month or how
That's
do they
just that that's a good question. Um, they the average caseload you're supposed to have at least then there wasn't really a cap on it when I first
okay.
started. Whenever I was getting ready, whenever I left, the cap was 12. So if you had 12 cases, they really tried not to assign you any more cases. However, that's not something that can be, I feel like, sustainable all the time because you might have a week where you're assigned 5 cases, and then you might have a week where you're assigned 2 cases. Well, all
Mm-hmm.
5 of those are due to close because we have our cases are not supposed to be open any longer than 60 days. So you might be able to close 2 of those 5 that one week, but then you've got still got 3. Like the math is definitely difficult to match. Um,
Right.
so it just kind of varies, but they tried to cap you out at 12.
Okay.
And and that was because they implemented a lot of things that were both positive and negative. I feel like as a worker, and as a supervisor, difficult things to manage. So that's just kind of how it went. They put a cap on it, and we did the best we can to try to maintain that cap for each worker.
Yeah, makes sense. And the types of cases that would generally it's hard to say generally or typically, but what were the types of cases? I do find in different countries and jurisdictions there's a difference in types of
Mhm.
allegations, predominantly of for some it's neglect, for some it's drug use. What are the typical caseload look like in Oklahoma?
I think for this area, and I know a few other areas, most cases, I would say probably about 75% of them are neglect. And whether that neglect is brought on by drug abuse or, I don't know, medical neglect, um, I, dirty house, those type of things. I would say probably most of them are neglect. We do get abuse cases, of course,
Mm.
but I think physical abuse, and sexual abuse, I think sexual abuse is probably the minimum of cases we get.
Okay.
Um, but when we get them, pretty, they're usually pretty bad. Um,
Right.
so I would say a majority of the cases we get here are neglect cases. And again, it varies what that neglect is, whether it's their parents an alcoholic or a drug addict or the house is just dirty or mom works, sometimes unfortunately, because of the world we live in, sometimes, these single moms, unfortunately, they get a bad rap because they're looked at as being neglectful. But really, there's only one way to pay the bills, and unfortunately, sometimes that's
Mm.
what happens. So
So
it
75%. So if I'm a worker, 75% of my cases are going to be neglect. And for those who are watching, neglect could happen as a result, as you said, of neglecting the home or neglect as a result of substance misuse, and then I'm passed out and I'm not looking after my kids at supervision and so on and so on and so on. Um, so the ones and the twos, the ones are immediate. To
Hmm.
give the audience a sense of what would a one look like. Uh, because I'm sure you've heard this as I have. Um, that people get a bit antsy and scared when they hear, oh, it's a dirty home. Well, my house is dirty. What are they going to show up at my house? So what would a one, a neglect one, which is you said an immediate response, need to look like for protection to show up?
Well, let me just say, what it needs to look like and what it actually is oftentimes are two very different things.
Okay.
Um, it's more of a when they call the hotline, what do they need to say to make it a one? Because in that 75% or even in that 100% of cases that we get, honestly, more than half of them are um, custody cases where parents are angry with one another, spiteful neighbors, um, people sometimes who don't understand that Mongolian spots are not bruises on your child's butt, things like that that may seem to be priority ones. Like if you get a call from a daycare where a child has bruises on his butt and comes in stinky or smells like weed or whatever it is, all of a sudden it seems real urgent. And then when you get out there, you find this child has Mongolian spots, and what you think is weed is actually a daycare provider who's never smoked weed before or smelled it, and it's really incense that they use in their home because from what it sounds like. So, um, I used to always tell my workers, take a breath, don't make any decisions until you get there, because what's on paper and what you actually will see are probably going to be two different things. And it doesn't help that we have shows like, you know, Law and Order SUV and Judge whatever it was that had and the Fosters that unfortunately emphasize the ones that are horrible. And there are horrible ones, don't get me wrong. I worked there 19 years and I would say I had my fair share of cases that I went home and just had to crawl in bed for. But those are not every single case that comes through like the media makes it seem. So, like I said, what it has to look like on paper is the house has to be, diapers everywhere, and the children are dirty. They're outside without any shoes or a coat, and it's snowing. And, there are a lot of key things that can be said for any referral to make it a one.
So important distinction, and thank you for making it. Um, uh, because you're right, and I remember showing up once and for Mongolian spots, well, bruises, and turned out to be Mongolian spots. And when you asked the child, how did you get these? He said, well, I eat a lot of mangoes, and that's why I have these. And it's because mom told him you get
Yeah,
Mongolian spots because you eat a lot of mangoes. But important distinction to make, and thank you for that, especially the
yeah.
custody and access situations that get pretty messy. Um, Can you give us a sense, though, of cases that were ones, legitimate ones, so the audience get a sense of what those look like?
Um, I've been to I've been to several houses where, and that's probably one of the ones that we get quite a bit. Where I'm at, it's a military town. And we have a lot of, unfortunately, and I don't mean this to be negative against young people or people who get married young and decide to have kids. I had my daughter late in life. I wish I would have had her younger because it took me longer to get my sisters over here sitting pretty with the empty nest, and I'm like, damn it. Um, but soldiers get deployed, their wives get, or even their husbands, um, get depressed, and the house gets, dirty. They've got three, four, five kids sometimes that they're trying to wrangle in and get to school and doctor's appointments and whatever else. And so, of course, there's some depression behind that. But I've been to houses where literally they had to open the door and just start shoveling stuff out the
Mm,
door because they've let things pile up. I went to a house one time that had like dirty diaper wall. I'm not really, and you know what, to this day, I've not figured this out. They're saving their child's diaper, putting them back in the box as they're dirty and just piling the boxes up in the
Mhm.
bedroom. I'm like, why? I don't like in my mind, I'm like, I don't even understand why you would do that. And there was no explanation given. It is what it is. We had to tell them that's not appropriate. Throw them outside. Bacteria, like your child's young, and roaches, and like the millions of health violations that this one thing caused. Um, Dirty dishes that are piled up, just not wanting to do them, tired from maybe working. Like there's a million and one reasons why a home gets like that. Lack of education. They grew up the same way. Uh, we we have foster kids that are then having kids that unfortunately, and we have some great foster parents, don't get me wrong, but we also have some that have not taught, just life skills, what it means to have a clean house, why you need to have a clean house. And my house is not spick and span either. And really anybody's house you could go to and, probably nitpick apart. Um, but, sometimes it's lack of education, sometimes it's drug use, sometimes it's I work 12-hour shifts, I'm doing the best I can. Um, Sometimes it's laziness, depression. There's a million and one reasons why these things can happen. And as a CPS worker, that was part of our job to help find out why and what can we do to change this behavior. So it's yeah, I've been to some houses and whew, I just some of them I look back and think, did I not gag? I mean, because I don't have a gag reflex. One of my workers, funny story, she has a horrible gag reflex. So I would always take her out when I went back to the house. Not usually when I first went, but when I went back. And if she didn't gag, I was like, y'all are good to
She's your canary in the coal mine
go.
situation. Um,
Yes.
so Shannon, the thanks for describing it the way you did, because it paints a picture for the seriousness of what those the ones look like. Can you give the audience a sense of, okay, so why did Shannon or CP workers care so much? So the house is dirty. What's the big deal? Like why are they getting involved in these situations? So what?
Well, um, I can give you generally, and I can also tell you my personal. Generally, I think CPS gets involved because we want children to be safe in their homes. And sometimes a lot of people think, well, they're not really going to get hurt. But growing up in a dirty home, you think about kids are cruel. So you grow up in a dirty home, you're a little bit smelly, you go to school, you're smelly there. Kids make fun of you. Teachers, and again, not to dog every teacher, but some teachers, they look at those kids and unfortunately, instead of having the attitude of, what can I do to make it better, sometimes just kind of push that kid aside as well. So
Mhm.
we're not looking at just one issue in the home. We're looking at what becomes a systemic issue throughout this child's life. So, which is important to when it's important to look at the situation that way because we may step in one time and never have to step in again. And what you do, whether it and not always for the family. Usually the family, it's never positive. It doesn't matter how good you are as a CPS worker. You could be as charismatic as Barack Obama, and they're not going to care. You can't just run up in my house and tell me how to raise my kids. I get it. But again, you have to look at it as a systemic issue that starts when this child is in a dirty home and smells bad, goes to school and smells bad. Nobody wants to talk. Their kids are cruel. They bully, they tease, teachers push them aside. Then, 2 or 3 years later, we're looking at a kid who is anxious to go to school, can't sit still, hasn't really learned anything because they're on survival mode when they hit school or when they hit home. Then a few years later, we're looking at a kid that's out there doing things that probably they're just trying to get attention for, negative or positive. We'll take it all. And it just becomes an issue that just grows and grows and grows. So early intervention really for me is the key. When we get in there, it's to make sure that that child has a safe environment at home, has a has good boundaries. Boundaries, oftentimes people look at those as a negative thing, but for kids, it makes them feel safe. They have an expectation, they know what it is, they know when they come home, they're going to be able to sleep in a bed that doesn't have roaches or doesn't have bed bugs or I had a kid tell me one time that he slept in a helmet and I was like, why are you sleeping in a helmet? And he said, so the roaches won't get in my ears. And I thought that is probably one of the saddest things I've ever heard. Did his parents love him? Absolutely. Were they great parents? In a lot of ways they really were. um, Both of them grew up in poverty. They didn't really see an issue with having roaches. That's just what happens when you live like that. No, we don't have to live that way. Let's put in stuff to tell you, to teach you, how not to. So generally, what we do is we try to help families provide the safety, well-being, try to make sure that we provide resources to them. For me personally, I felt that it was important because when I was growing up, I had a friend and we were just the best of friends. We had the same first name. I did not realize then that she was a foster child. And then one day she was just gone. And that's when I realized, as an adult looking back, when I went to the house, that her foster parents told me she just doesn't live here anymore. And
Mm.
I always thought, I wonder what happened to her. And when I got older, um, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I had a teacher that happened to work for child welfare. And I was like, oh, I think I could do that. And I lasted a lot longer than most people. 19 years is a long time.
It is.
Um, but I always looked at it as a privilege to be able to provide services and hopefully change these lives. So making that initial first step, when I say it can be positive or negative, no matter what it was for the parents, I always tried to make it positive for the children.
Nice.
So
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for giving us a kind of a better sense of the impact, because it isn't, as you said, a lot of this seems to be as a result of poverty and poor upbringing, and you're not getting involved to make families' lives more difficult. I hear a lot of compassion and empathy in your voice, and it's more about helping um, and making sure that children grow up in a safe and thriving environment. Not to mention, if you have young babies, I remember,
yes,
the clutter in the home and where you can't move, and if there was a fire,
yes.
kids putting things in their mouth and choking, falling down the stairs and so on. So I get that. I um you talked about the 3 to 5 years, and you said I lasted for 19 years. The turnover, you said, in Oklahoma where you work is 3 to 5 years. Give us a sense of why that is. What's going on that the turnover is so high?
I think part of it is because well, we hire people and we don't give them an appropriate sense of what it is that they'll be doing.
Okay.
Um, we all the trainings. I laugh because anytime I go to a training for child welfare, or when I used to go, well, even now when I do trainings for this job and other jobs, they make it seem like you're just going to go to your parents and you're going to say, we're going to offer you these services, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That's not really how it works. Sometimes you're begging them to be parents. When I did treatment, there were times when I was like, why am I chasing these people around, begging them to be? I'm doing more work than they are for their kid. And that was very frustrating. However, as a treatment worker, that's part of your job. That's what you do. Now, whenever you watch the video about what a treatment worker does, that doesn't look like it doesn't look the same. Um, of course, whenever you go to trainings for CPS for the child protection part of it, they give you the examples of horrific cases, which there are some. However, the day to day is not always like that. A lot of times you don't get, but then when you do, it's not the same as hearing it in a classroom. Um, I also did forensic interviews in the time that I was at child welfare, and those are for cases where you're trying to find some pretty rough information. Um, and for a lot of workers, I think the secondary trauma that they go through in hearing some of this stuff, um, it's like this is what I watched on TV, and then all of a sudden it really happens. And to actually see those children um, and to kind of have to take on a little piece of that, it's hard. It's hard because, like I said, we don't get a whole lot of. I can't say in the 19 years that I worked there, it was probably maybe, which this number sounds high, but you have to remember I had 5 workers and each worker had 12 cases at any given time. So we're talking about 60 cases at a time that rotate through. So when you look at all of those in the 19 years I was there, I probably had 20 or 30 cases that if I think about too much, I probably would still break out and cry. Um, little kids telling you stuff and that you just can't even imagine. So not that's not for everybody. Um, it's real easy to say, well, I hooked them up with, we have a service here called comprehensive home-based services. They go in and teach them how to parent. They do modules with them it's easy to say, well, I helped them because I put this in their home. It's a lot harder to say, I took that child out of the home. Dad was arrested because he was fondling her. And then to find out later that he actually did have sex with her and she's 4 years old. If you have a 4-year-old at home, there's nothing that makes that okay. Like you can't even just what it does to your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take that secondary trauma on, and then to think about, oh my God, this family has really gone through that. They don't. There's no way they can prepare anyone for that. No, no, I don't care who you are. You can't be prepared to hear something like that. So I think that's part of the reason, because the training that they give us is not realistic. Not that they could give you realistic training because every day is different. You never know. Um, there are cases that it's one child. We just recently, I was reading in the paper, a guy from a couple counties over got arrested. They actually extradited him back from another county because they found out he was dealing all 5 of his kids, in addition to 7 or 8 other kids that he was a camp counselor for. Nothing prepares you for that. Nothing. And if you stay in child welfare protective services, you're going to get it's you're going to get at least one case like that in a 10 to 20-year period. Um, so I think 3 to 5 years is probably the max for that reason because they're not completely prepared. The other reason I think is because not everybody goes in this as they really want to help. Some of them just go into it because it's a job they can get. You get a degree. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go work here. It's a lot of overtime with state mandates and federal mandates to get states money and this and that. It's a lot of, they put a lot of pressure on us to complete tasks that are greatly impacting people's lives. Um, and they want us to make quick decisions. 60 days. You have 60 days to decide. And they really want you to do it in 30 days. You have 30 days to decide what's wrong, fix it, and get out. And that's not always easy. Um, they talk about safety, but I mean, so there's the pressure of, oh my God, what if I make a mistake? What if
Mm-hmm.
I go in and I walk away thinking, X, Y, and Z? And then I walk away, and the next thing I know, I've been to houses where, uh, mom's clearly got a black eye, and you ask her about the domestic violence, and she says nothing. You can't make her tell you. You can't force her to get services. Um, Sometimes you have to walk away knowing this is not a good situation, but you can't make anybody be ready. Now you can give them, it's kind of that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So as workers, let's say we leave and then the next thing you know, dad shoots everybody, shoots himself. That's a pretty heavy burden to bear. You didn't what and really and ultimately there's nothing you can do. So, I mean, there's so many reasons why I think people don't last because it's hard. It's a hard job. It's not, and then they only pay you 30 some $1,000 a year to do it. And you're just like, here I've got this child's life in my hands, or and I but we get good benefits. So I guess I don't know. I don't know. There's lots of reasons why it's difficult, and lots of reasons why I think people don't stay. It's a
Well,
lot
and
of pressure.
yeah, you did an excellent job talking about that from secondary trauma. You're not the first to talk about it, to um fear of getting it wrong, which is could be paralyzing. Um, what if I get this wrong?
Mhm.
Um, what are some of the misunderstandings that you think the public has about child protection?
Well, I think the first misunderstanding is, people think that we're in there doing a snatch and grab, and that's not what we're doing. Um, we well here, and I know other places as well. Up until probably the last, and I'm just going to be completely honest, up until the last 2 or 3 years that I worked for child welfare, it was about putting, you know, appropriate resources in. It was about family preservation. It was about legitimately trying to help this family. Um, and if they cooperate, well, let's start over. The biggest misconception is that they don't have to cooperate with DHS or with Child Protection Services. People think they do, but they don't. Okay, so probably the first misconception is that people don't have to cooperate with Child Protection Services. You can tell us to kick rocks, but a lot of people don't know that. Which I don't know if really it's good that people do know that, but I mean it's always good to know your rights. Um, So that's probably one of the first misconceptions. The second misconception is that again, up until about probably 5 years before I left the agency, um, it really was about trying to help people. It was about that family preservation. It was about those things. The last 5 years I was there, there's always a swing in the pendulum.
Hmm.
So when I first started, it was all about helping, 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 helping. The last 5 years I was there, which is why I left, um, it got to be about you're not asking the right questions. They're not telling you the truth. They're not, well, of course they're not. Nobody, you're not going to walk into somebody's house and they think they're neglecting their kid, or they think that, the discipline that was used when they were a child is um, child abuse because they went through it. That's how their parents disciplined, and they're fine. So it became about playing that gotcha game, and
Hmm.
I finally had to. That was too much for me. So um, I think if the system is run the way that it's supposed to, it really is supposed to be about helping people. That's the whole reason it was set up, to educate families and not, unfortunately, it is true. There are families that just, you can't, you're not going to be able to fix that.
Right.
Um, you are going to have to make those tough decisions about, is this better? But originally, it was always about ensuring that the child was safe in the home. Because even kids who have the worst parents, um, they want to be with them. They love their parents. So, you know, I guess that's the best.
Yeah. Um, no, you're right when you talk about um the gotcha, and then you start to wonder what is this all about,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Why am I here? Because we could do these things to help this family, but because you're set on this one thing, you all of a sudden it becomes a different situation. I don't know. I think the critical thinking and the family preservation part out of it, even though they promote that a lot, that really because it's just here we have where they do safety plans with family members and they try to do all these things to help preserve the family, but really they don't want to do that because you're essentially saying we don't think these kids are safe in the home, but we don't want to take them out. So they're trying to push that because those families are right on the edge. They're trying to push that so that I guess so for basically covering your own ass. But and I get that because it's we're liable for those things, which again is one of the other reasons why I think that it's difficult to stay in this because that's a lot of responsibility for one person um, to be in charge of and then to be held accountable for,
Right.
regardless.
And you're saying if it's 12 cases, what the audience need might not appreciate is 12 cases, but each family might have 3 or 4 kids. So multiply that by the number of kids that the worker is responsible for.
Right. And that's a lot. It's a
Yeah,
lot. And then we're on call and sometimes we're out all night. Like it's a lot.
absolutely.
It's a lot.
So when you think about your 19 years, I'll start with what is most, would you say is most challenging, and then I'll move to what was most rewarding, and then maybe talk about a memorable case for you. But let's start with what would you, for you, was most challenging about the work?
I think the most challenging about the work it was probably the agency politics, and having to feel like not only were you having to advocate for your clients, which was your job, but you have to advocate for your employees as well. Because we have people that are above us that will go in and start looking through cases, and all of a sudden, your employee didn't do this, your employee didn't do that. Why are you not following up with this? Why are you not following up with that? So a lot of it was because again, the last probably 4 or 5 years that I worked there, like I felt like every day was a fight. Every day was
Hmm.
not just was I having to advocate for clients and services and all that, but then I was having to advocate for my workers too. I was having to advocate for, you know, assignments. I was having to advocate for because when the assignments come down to the county, a supervisor assigns them. Well, when you have this supervisor that's pulling out everything easy and trying to, dump on other, then you got to advocate for them too. Because that system changed. It wasn't always like that. Before it was whatever came in just went, and everybody kind of just went in there and just assigned one, two, three. Um, then it changed to, well, this supervisor is going to do assignments for this long, and this supervisor is going to do assignments for this long. And of course, when they're in there looking, and not being fair, so one unit might have all sexual abuse cases. And you're
Hmm.
like, why am I getting all these? So then you got to advocate for, it just became every day you just went into work and you're just like, okay, what am I going to have to fight about today? So that was probably the most challenging. It was more about, I love the work
Yeah,
with the clients. It was the office stuff that drove me to be like, I I can't argue with everybody today. I can't be trying to advocate for everybody today, So
yeah.
that was probably
Okay. Okay. And what did you find most rewarding?
um I think what I found most rewarding were things like one time, well, a couple of good solid arrests I found pretty rewarding. Um I also found like I one of my moms, I was going through the drive-through at a fast food restaurant, and she was working the window telling me she had just gotten promoted to manager, and thank you for stepping in our lives. And so occasionally for years, whenever I wanted to quit, something like that always happened, and I thought, okay, I'll stick it out a little bit longer. This is worth it. It's worth it to see, or to run into some of the kids that you helped and have them say, thank you, or what, you remember that time we did this, or those things have been the most rewarding.
Yeah, I hear you. Um, is there I'm sure there is, but if you're able to share a case that kind of sticks out, most memorable case in the 19 years. But I also asked this question, and I want to phrase it properly because I don't want it to come off sounding um um weird, but also if there are kind of moments where not that they were funny laughing at child protection, but child protection workers have a dark sense of humor, and we see lots of crazy things, and but things that kind of make, when you think about after the fact, you're like you might be laughing or chuckling about yeah. So memory, yeah, case that stuck with you, and maybe something that when you think backwards, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened.
Well, okay, so probably the case that stuck with me the was we had a case, and there were it was a little girl, and I I ended up putting her in custody because her stepdad was doing some weird stuff, having her clean naked and stuff like that. And the detective, he had just come on, just started working our cases. And I kept telling him, you need to really take this a little bit more seriously because I feel like you're not taking it as serious as you're supposed to. So we argued about it. Finally, he, got to the point where he was like, you quit telling me how to do my job. And I was like, all right, you know what? I did everything I could. I took her out of the home. She moved with her grandma. She was safe. About probably 3 or 4 months later, he called me and he said, I just want to apologize to you because you were right. I just got out of this class. And he said, and I could have checked the boxes with everything you told me. And that was probably the beginning of what became a shift in the relationship that we had with law enforcement. And I think that's why I remember that case so much because all of a sudden we weren't in the way anymore.
Mm,
We could provide, you know, help.
right.
And probably the funniest case I ever had was the first child I ever removed, which sounds tragic and horrible, and it was. Don't get me wrong. I cried. The girl that was with me, she was a senior worker at the time, was out in the parking lot screaming at me, "Get it together! We don't child welfare. There's no crying in child welfare." But what made it even worse was the house was dirty, so we had gone back to check the house, and we're walking in the bedroom, and I look over, and at the top of the closet is a blow up doll, and she's wearing like a leather bustier with spikes on it, and she's got a gag ball in her mouth. And I tapped the girl that was with me on the shoulder, and and she looked, and I was like, was she being too loud? And we both just fell out laughing. And here we are supposed to be taking pictures of this house, this dirty house. And we just, I mean, after that, I was like, stop. She was like, you did. I mean, it was horrible, but that was um, the lightest of the sexual things that we found in the house. But we were both like, was she yelling? Like, is she a squeaky toy? I mean, it was not good. It was not good.
We almost need a book about the weirdest, funniest,
Oh, mhm.
strangest things child protection
Yes,
workers see when they walk into homes. Um,
yes.
yeah, because I've seen some crazy, crazy things. Um,
I know.
Shannon,
I
what?
wish I had all the pictures.
Yeah,
I wish I had the pictures now. Like every now and then I'm like, what? We took a picture of this bucket one time that was in this woman's kitchen, and it looked like egg drop soup. I'm not really sure what was in it, and there were a couple of jugs of like old milk in it. And so every time I taught it, because I used to teach classes, to the rookie police officers that came in. So I
Mm,
would put together like the worst pictures I could find. Pictures. At one time we went to this house and we were counting kids and we couldn't find the 18-month-old. The 18-month-old was under a thing of clothes on the couch.
mm.
So we had taken a picture of the couch before we found the kid. So I was like, does anybody see a kid here in this picture? And they're all looking. You can't see the kid. He's buried under all these clothes, sleeping. But I wish I had all those pictures now because every now and then I want to look at that bucket because we still, after all those years, never could figure out what is in there. Like, is this a koi pot? Like, what is she doing? Yeah, it was awful. But yeah,
So,
I mean,
so
you have to laugh.
yeah, and for people who don't might not understand it, when I talked about the dark humor, it's the way you
Hmm.
kind of that's you need dark humor to get you through the day sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Shannon, what would you recommend or advise? And I think I can already tell that you have a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And what would you say or recommend to um, potential or new staff or individuals maybe watching this and saying, "Hey, I want to do this work." What would you recommend or advise them to do?
I would recommend and advise them to, I don't know, pray to whatever you believe in, whether it's God or luck or fates or whatever it is, before you go into any house, because because you never know what you're going to hear. So, my mom calls it the armor of God. Put on your armor. So, um, when I was little, I used to think my mom sounds crazy. But when I got older, I learned to appreciate that phrase because you do have to put on some kind of armor, whether, like I said, you believe it's the armor of God or you believe you have to arm yourself. And I don't mean to arm yourself with um, bad things, but with positive things, patience, empathy, compassion, um, those things, because you have to have all of those things. Um, the second thing that I would advise is you should always, and I used to have this quote on my desk, there but for the grace, because they say we're all, two paychecks away from poverty. Well, you know what? We're probably three steps away from this family. Count your blessings because I had good parents. I came from a broken home. My dad was kind of crazy. My mom is a tornado, but we as kids always came first. And a lot of these kids don't know what that's like. They wouldn't even, and sometimes again, like I said, it's not because their parents don't want to put them first. It's because, we need water, we need gas, we need electricity. Um, so those are probably the things that I would advise. And I would also advise that just because that you're watching those videos, you have no idea what you're getting into. Um, because it really is a calling. You can't I don't think anyone really truly can do this work if it's not. If it's not in your spirit or if it's not in your if it's not something you really want to do. Um I think it's great. I used to think it was great when the new workers would come in and they'd be all, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and they'd be horrified at some of the things that we would say and um I used to always look at them and think, "Oh, aren't they cute?" Because the reality is not, you have to, and I hate to say you have to be a realist, but you really do. You can't go into this thinking everything you do is going to make a change in some family's life because people will change when they're ready,
Mm,
but you can provide them all the resources to do that. And sometimes it is just a conversation that puts them in a place where they can be ready.
mm,
Sometimes it is just explaining to them what a difference this one thing might make in their life. Um, so, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be wide eyed and bushy tailed, but I'm also saying that the reality of the situation is You have to meet these families where they're at. And where you are and where they are probably going to be two very different places. Um, and probably lastly, I would say um, your standard is not everybody's standard. And this isn't about working in this field, isn't about uh, judging people based on what you believe or what your standard is. It's about helping sometimes a F parent become a D parent.
Hmm.
And then maybe next time from a D to a C parent. It may not ever be an A. And you just have to accept that. So I think those would be the things that I would tell them.
Thank you, Shannon. You've been a pleasure, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Well, you're welcome.
Learned a lot listening to you.